Can you hear me? Dustin's gonna kill me. Hi, thank you all for coming. For those of you that don't know me, or if this is your first Health Revolution event, I'm Jackie. I'm the founder of Vivid. And if y'all told me a year ago I'd be standing in front of this many people talking, I'd drop dead. So it's kind of a testament to the fact that when you find your divine purpose and you're driven on a mission that's bigger than you, how the fear kind of just subsides, and then it's excitement. And so here we are. And I'm really excited that all of you are joining us. These three people up here are awesome and knowledgeable, and it's going to be a fun night tonight. Oh, before we get started, I really want to thank our gracious hosts, Mercedes-Benz of Lafayette and Sharon Moss. She swooped in. She swooped in a couple months ago when we were lost and looking for a place to land, and we've been working together the last few months, getting to know each other, and it's just been wonderful. You're an inspiration, and I'm really honored to know you and honored to be here in your space. It's beautiful. Allowing us to be here really allows us to have these conversations that are so important to our community. Lafayette's not the healthiest place, so we're working on that. So appreciate you, and this is our first time here, and hopefully not our last time here. So about a year ago, I had my own health scare with gut health, and these three people actually played pretty instrumental roles in that, and I couldn't ask for three better people to be up here tonight to talk to us about it. So without further ado, let's get started. But before we do, one more thing. This is only my second event. I'm not a professional event planner, although, it might be surprising. So I appreciate the grace. This is not going to be perfect, and there might be some hiccups and growing pains, but I also want your feedback. So after this, if you have notes, like how can we improve? What did you like? What more do you want to learn about? This is not about us. This isn't an ego thing. None of us are up here for personal gain. We're not making a lot of money off of this. This is truly an act of service that we want to do to help our community grow and get healthier. And if we're not giving y'all what you want, then what's the purpose of doing it? So I would love any feedback at all after this. You can talk to me or email me, whatever. So let's get it. Before we get started, I was kind of hoping Dr. Bro would talk to us about what is the digestive system.
So not to get into extreme detail, but I think it's important to remember the digestive system. It's not, just a tube where food goes in and comes out. Whenever you eat something, digestion starts as soon as you start with chewing. A lot of enzymes in saliva start to break down food and start to change the chemical nature of food. Then even as it travels, there's an entire nervous system in the GI tract that's controlling the movements of food, that's coordinating to go down. And the important thing to remember is that, not only is there a lot of processes going on, but there's a lot of places where things can go wrong. Not only go wrong from a disease standpoint, but also from the standpoint of, from your central nervous system, from stress, from the way we eat, from the chemicals in the environment, from the way foods are processed and things that are taken out as far as nutrients and added in as far as pollutants can affect this whole entire process. And so, as food goes down, even as it gets into the stomach, things continue to progress as far as enzymes get secreted. Stuff is coming from the liver that helps to digest proteins and fats. And then all throughout the GI tract, including the small intestine, which is kind of the bag of worms in the middle of the large intestine, which is around 20 feet long and has significant capacity to absorb nutrients. But in addition to that, it also has a huge environment of bacteria. There's actually more bacterial cells in the small bowel, not so much, but more so in the distal colon than human cells. It's about 3 to 4 pounds of bacteria itself, mostly in the colon, but some in the small bowel as well. And not only do they take part in digestion, but they're also taking part in some of the signaling processes that go up to let your body know, I need to eat more protein or I need more carbohydrates. And this is also some of the places where things can go wrong, where processed foods can send the wrong signals, lead to different conditions that we'll talk about a little bit later. And then as food continues to progress through that, same thing happens in the colon. There's not only a lot of interaction with the enzymes in our body, but there's also interactions with that bacterial ecosystem that I talked to y'all about. So things get produced by the bacteria that act in signaling, but also in nourishing the body and communicating with the body. So you can see, even just breaking it down like that, there's extreme detail in each segment, but there's a lot of things that could go right, and a lot of times it does, but then there's a lot of things that can go wrong. And there's a lot of things that, we can do to improve each and every one of those steps. There's a lot of places where we can prevent cancer. There's a lot of places where we can help with that communication, so we nourish our bodies and we listen to our bodies. But just kind of wanted to start with this so it frames the context of how complicated this system is. But the more that we all understand it, and the more that we're educated about it, we can improve our bodies and our health.
Awesome. Thank you. Also, just so all of you know, these mics are not the best. So if you keep your mouth really close to it, I paid a lot for them, but. Okay, let's start with the basics. Let's start with Daphne, and then everyone can answer. Why is gut health such a critical aspect of overall wellness?
If you think about your digestive system, it's really kind of open. It's like open, it's not a tube, but it kind of is a tube where the exterior has to interface with what's happening before it can get absorbed into your body. So just as an example, if you were to swallow a marble, it's going to just go straight through and it's going to come out the other end. It's not going to be broken down efficiently. At least we certainly hope not. But so it's kind of the exterior. So your digestive system is where your body has to determine if something is going to be allowed to be pulled into your system. And so you have to have a lot of signaling, and you have to have your digestive system has to be intact. So the small intestines is lined with one cell layer that runs through the small intestines. And if it's not intact, then things will get absorbed into the body that are not intended to be there.
And to piggyback off of that, if you think about your skin as your external barrier for all the environmental contaminants and things like that, that your skin allows that protection from the outside. But whenever you think about your digestive system, it's made up very similarly to your skin, where it is that protective barrier, because it is also the point of contact for these external things in your body. So as Daphne said, it is very important to make sure that that barrier on the inside is the best possible way, the healthiest it can be, because just the smallest change in that environment can just offset and just really cascade a lot of unfortunate events that could happen. But also small little changes can also make such a positive impact on your environment as well. I mean, it is super complicated, like Dr. Bro said, but also it's really simple at the same time.
Yeah, and to piggyback off of what they said, I want to tell an interesting story. So with the GI tract, we always think about it, from the digestive part. And Daphne brought up a good point where, the largest amount of immune tissue is in the GI tract as well. So a lot of the learning that your immune system gets as you're developing as a child takes place with, things coming into that huge exposed area. If you took the whole GI tract and you spread it out, with taking each of these villi with the surface area they have, it would probably be the size, a little bit bigger than a tennis court. So you can imagine if your skin was the size of a tennis court, how much exposure you get to antigens, and which are just proteins in the environment that interact with your immune cells. So as you're developing it and throughout life, if you don't treat that exposed area well, you can have abnormal exposures to these proteins and antigens, and then you develop autoimmune conditions, eczema, develop inflammation, which kind of goes down a whole cascade. And there's even, there's tons of studies about children growing up in areas where they're exposed to more dirt, they have pets as kids, and they just have a different exposure where they have significantly less allergies to like tree nuts and peanuts, also less eczema, less asthma. And, we see that in children just because it's easier studies to perform, but also in adults. We see it a ton in our practice where, a lot of the lifestyle factors in combination with someone's baseline genetic risk will lead to a lot of these autoimmune conditions from just, poor exposures to the GI tract. So it's very important, like they were saying, the GI tract is very important for the processes it does, like digestion and absorption of nutrients, and all those things, but it's also a huge immune trigger in our bodies, and it's a huge learning place for our immune cells, and it's a big point where things can go very wrong if you're not taking well care of it. And I see lots of inflammatory bowel disease patients, which is Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, the more common names that people hear. And we know that there's a genetic trigger, and then at some point, something happens with an immune exposure that goes wrong, and then the body starts to use its own immune system against itself. And not to say that some of these people might have potentially not still developed it, but if we're more conscious of that pathway and what can cause it and what can lead to those things, you don't make it go to zero, but maybe you could reduce it by 20% or 30% or 40%, which would be, millions of people. And so it's good to remember the immune component in addition to all the other processes that the GI tract does.
So what are some examples of things that we're doing to damage our digestive system and our tracts?
I mean, I think, and it goes back to if y'all saw Daphne and Dr. LaFleur and Jackie, if anybody was at the first one, but, just the basic lifestyle factors, sleep deprivation can affect the permeability and the lining and your reaction to immune cells. Not having the right diet, especially high ultra processed foods, can affect it. Not moving enough, overconsumption of food, even if it is, in our minds it's healthy, because some of these ultra processed foods will get marketed as healthy foods, but just that metabolic dysfunction can lead to inflammation and increased permeability. And then that's not even touching like getting into toxins and like red dye that was just recently found. Well, we've always known it was an issue, but now they're going to start removing it from foods and from medications. So obviously it's very difficult to control all the environmental exposure things, but if you could at least focus on sleep and movement and nutrition and whole foods and avoiding ultra processed foods, I think that would make a significant dent in some of this stuff, because those are the things that are going to alter the way your gut microbiome communicates. It's going to alter the intestinal permeability, which is basically your intestine's ability to not let everything just come flying in, which when stuff comes flying in, that means toxins, whether it's from bacteria that are not good bacteria, or it's pesticides, or it's different things in our environment.
You mentioned the word microbiome. Not everyone knows what we're talking about, I assume. Can y'all explain what is the microbiome?
The microbiome is a conglomerate of mostly bacteria, some fungi, maybe a few little amoebas, some other types of microbes, but it's what lines the majority of your large intestines, not as much in your small intestines, but it is a community. So I always describe it as a community of microbes, just as here in Lafayette, we have a community where there are lots of different types of people, but some of them are more alike than others. And so in that community, they work together to be able to break down food, digest food. They work together to support the absorption of nutrients. They actually produce nutrients for us. And so it's not considered an organ, but it works and functions and is as important as one of your organs would be. So just like you wouldn't want to just not pay attention to an organ, your heart, we're conscious that our heart is a very important organ in our body. Our brain is a very important organ in our body. Our gut microbiome is also just as important as those organs. So it's not considered an organ, but it functions and it does as many things as an organ would do.
And one of its main functions with the microbiome is to create this environment that, as we've mentioned, is acting in the best interest of our body. And the gut, a main part of the gut is it signals with your brain and interacts with your brain to make sure that your brain is telling your body to do the right things as well. And that's through the vagus nerve, which runs through your brain stem, through your chest, into your abdomen. And your vagus nerve really is the guy who has the pulse on the rest of your body. It tells your brain the status of everything that's going on, and then your brain reacts in a way. So it works the same way with stress, with hunger. Once these signals get to your vagus nerve and it sends it out to your body, your body starts in that cycle of reacting. So if your microbiome is kind of out of whack, right, and not proportionally optimum, it'll send the wrong signals. And then, how many of you, when you're really stressed out, you eat, right? You go get a piece of cake or you get your ice cream, right? It's almost a natural response, but that's because your microbiome and your digestive system is signaling this flight or fight response. And so it's not just digestion, but it really interacts with your entire body and every system, your cardiovascular system, your brain, your cerebral vascular system. Your hormones are affected. Every single system in your body is affected by what first happens in your digestive system.
That was actually going to be my next question: is how does your microbiome tie into hormone issues? Because I feel like almost everyone has hormone issues these days, whether it's your thyroid or otherwise. Can y'all elaborate a little bit about how those two tie together? Is there anything else to add to that?
I believe that there's some stuff that's known, and certainly y'all can correct me. There's a lot that is this idea of the gut being such an important factor to the way that the entire body functions. It's fairly new in the scheme of medical years, or in the scheme of medicine. So there are some things that are known. That think there are far more unknown questions about the questions with an unknown answer about the microbiome. So we know that hormones are involved or are affected by different specific types of microbes that are in the digestive system. We know that they communicate. So hormones, by definition, are communicators. And so the microbiome affects those communicators. But I think there's a lot more questions that we have that we don't have answers for. Dr. Breaux?
And there's been some studies, like especially with IBS and like corticotropin releasing factor, which is something that comes from the brain, from the hypothalamic pituitary axis, but it controls hormones. But there's some direct feedback via the vagus nerve, but also from chemical mediators in the microbiome. So like Daphne was saying, this stuff is like, especially a lot of the microbiome stuff, after they sequenced the human genome, they had this big project to sequence the bacterial genome, which was much more complicated because there's about 500 times as many genes in the bacterial genome as they are in the human genome. So they're kind of in the process, like in the last 8 to 9 years of, what signals are being sent. Like, is it just serotonin? Are they sending other neurochemicals? Are they sending metabolites like butyrate or something like that? And so we're just now figuring out what they're actually sending. So, to determine if they're influencing like the thyroid, for example, or something else. I mean, I feel like we're, 5 to 10 years out from even getting there, but I would imagine if they're affecting all these other things, they have to be playing a part. Just like Daphne said, you almost have to think of it. It's essentially another organ. The only difference is it's not our genetic material, but it's functioning in every other way. And every other organ system contributes. So I would imagine it would. It's just we don't know the direct mechanism.
There's a lot to be learned.
It's a good time to start talking about it. Let's talk about the gut-brain axis and how your gut affects mental health. Dr. Bro, do you want to start?
So, we do know it's kind of a loop system, and she'll kind of show the slide, but, your central nervous system, what we consider the brain and spinal cord, and the enteric nervous system is what we generally refer to as all the nerve tissue inside the GI tract. So it's a circular communication. Now, a lot of this stuff is going on behind the scenes. So, for example, when you eat a piece of fruit or whatever, and it's going through the GI tract, you're not aware of every single thing that's happening. Like, you're not saying, oh, my pancreas is secreting enzymes now. Okay, I've just left the small bowel. Now it's in the colon, So all that communication is happening. It's just like anything else. The central nervous system is just keeping it suppressed, and it's not letting it come into your conscious mind. But the feedback loop is always happening. For example, like, you're at dinner with a friend, conversation is going great, and someone spills a drink on you, or you get into an argument at dinner, the GI tract system will stop immediately. So, I mean, there's feedback loops going both ways. And so a lot of these conditions like IBS and, the thought process used to be, oh, it's in your mind. Yes, that's true, but that's an extreme oversimplification because you're not in control of it sometimes. Sometimes these hormones are getting released that's ramping up the GI system, or the GI system's doing things to ramp up the central nervous system. Like, for example, if you get a viral gastroenteritis, it sends a signal to your brain, to your vomiting center, evacuate everything, and you start vomiting. So there's communication both ways. So it's very intimately associated. So I think, traditionally in healthcare, we wanted to silo everything, where we'd say, you have a heart doctor, and you have a GI doctor, and you have a kidney doctor, where everything is connected. It's not to say, oh, it's not a GI issue, see the psychiatrist, or the psychiatrist says it's not a psychiatry issue, see the GI doctor. It's a complete closed loop system, and it makes sense because you need a coordinated body to do all these things. And so not only, like we were talking about, are there hormones that are communicating up, metabolites from the food you eat go up to the brain and send signals, but they've even had studies where they can actually put fluorescent labels on neurons, and they can track some of these neurons, which are basically the nerve cells that traditionally are in the brain and spinal cord, but they're in the GI tract, and they actually show that there's only one connection between a cell that's in the small bowel straight to the brain. So it's extremely fast communication. And this is all just in the last 2 or 3 years that they've found this. So before they thought it was just, oh, it was hormones or it was some kind of chemicals going, but it's an actual straight neurologic connection in addition to the vagus nerve that we knew about. So we're just starting to peel back the layers of all this stuff, but it's very important to remember. And I think if you can take anything away from this conversation, is that it's all intimately connected, and it's complicated, but at the same time, the things that you can do to improve this system or not complicated things. It's all things that's in the wheelhouse of stuff that we can do. You just have to find the right people that can help guide you enough to keep you on that path to do it.
Piggyback on that. So as a dietitian, I feel like I wouldn't do my duty if I didn't say that the obvious, that what you eat has a direct correlation. It is actually in contact with the digestive system. So when you eat something, it is actually in contact with the cells that are determining if it's going to be allowed to go into your body or it's not going to go into your body. And so the foods that you eat, food and sleep are the two things that I will die on a hill. The foods that you eat absolutely make a incredible impact on the way that your body functions in every way. So talking about the mind and the gut-brain axis, the foods that you eat will impact anxiety, depression, but all diseases are impacted by the foods that you eat, because your gut, you're putting it in your system, and your body, your digestive system is having to figure out, do we keep it or do we let it keep going through? And it's a complex but kind of simple system. So again, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't really make an emphasis that the foods that you eat every single day. And just another thought, that it's been found that we make about 500 food decisions in a day. And so they're not all going to be perfect. Nobody's trying to make everything perfect, but the decisions that you make every single day are going to impact the way that your digestive system functions every single day. And the foods that we eat today are going to have an impact for a couple of days. And the foods that, if you have the times where you're like, go on vacation, because I interview people all the time about food, and they're like, well, I'm going on vacation, so you got to cut me some slack. Hey, it's not me. You're doing this to whatever you're doing to yourself. But if you go on vacation, you may find that your foods are different and your digestive system functions differently. It doesn't take years and years for it to happen. It happens right now. So the flip side of that is true, that if you decide, okay, I'm going to step it up and I'm just going to level up a little bit, then your digestive system is going to start functioning better. And so it's all about the decisions that we make every single day.
And going off of this too, I know we don't talk a lot about pediatrics when we talk about gut health and these things. However, it is a giant elephant in the room when it comes to nutrition, mental health, and the effects of all these things that happen with our children. Because there are plenty of research out there that shows the food that they eat with processed food, artificial dyes, all kind of crazy stuff, directly affects the way that they act. And so, a lot of people are very quick to diagnose ADHD in kids and adults, and all these mental health problems, which, look, the genetics are out there, mental health problems are going to be out there, but a lot of it can be combated with your lifestyle and the choices that you're putting in your body and your children's body. So it's more of just, my purpose, honestly, is as long as, my clients, our people here can make informed decisions about their health and what they're eating and what they're providing for their families, then have at it, and it's really become the topic, right? It's national news now, and I'm really excited that these topics are coming ahead.
Good stuff. Personally, I don't do dyes and cut processed food significantly, and I can definitely tell my kids. My youngest is a wild animal. If I give her any food dye whatsoever, it takes 7 minutes. I have it on a timer and she's crying. It's terrible. So because I don't give it to them, I really notice it. So if anyone is wondering about the legitimacy of that, it's absolutely true. Are there any lifestyle, besides the food, are there lifestyle things that affect our gut-brain communication? Such as stress
and sleep are my two things. Sleep, we have this cycle of sleep, and we talk about everything in the body is a cycle. And when it comes to your gut and the importance of it, if it is not functioning properly, it can affect your sleep. But also, on the flip side, if you have erratic sleep patterns or, something's going on in your life and you're just not sleeping well, that can also trigger dysfunction in your gut. So it's this bidirectional communication that we often talk about. And so I really think as far as sleep goes, you really just need to make the best environment for sleep as you can. Dark, cold rooms, get away from the electronics, eye covers, anything you can to really make a nice environment to get sleep. And it'll just start that cycle in a good way.
So all three of you are into gut health, but you all have different roles. Dr. Groh, you're clinical, Daphne's dietitian, Rebecca is a nurse, and she has a holistic health coach. So can you give me can you give me each some practical, actionable steps that people can take to improve their gut health now, like in your realm? Yeah, Daphne, you go first.
Okay, so again, the foods that you eat make a big difference. If we're focusing on what kinds of foods, the foods with fiber, which is going to be most of your plant foods, are going to make the biggest impact, and they're going to feed the microbes in your digestive system that you want to feed. The other major food component or food category, I would say, is fermented foods. And fermented foods are not super popular around here. Most countries have a particular fermented food that's pretty common for them. So fermentation is basically adding bacteria into a food that's going to allow that bacteria to grow. So the closest thing I would say that we have in our culture would be yogurt as a fermented food. Not all yogurt is fermented, I should probably re-say that. All yogurt is fermented to some degree, but fermented foods and fiber are the two biggest categories that are going to positively feed your gut microbiome.
There's actually a girl here locally. What's the company with the fermented food? She's local.
Oh, it's
Counterculture. Oh, well, never mind. Psych. But she had great fermented pickles.
Oh, yes. So they're not doing it anymore. But Rosanna, who owns R2. That's the one I'm thinking of. Okay, yeah. Rosanna's still doing fermented stuff. And she will ferment anything. Rosanna will ferment anything. So things like kombucha, that's pretty common. Kefir is another type of fairly common. But literally you can go into Rosanna's place and she's got fermented mustard, fermented bean paste, fermented cocoa paste. I mean, she's amazing. She will ferment just about anything. And it's all really good. And I happen to know Rosanna really well. And so it's done to the highest degree. So it's really good quality fermented foods.
Typically, my first step, I often say, is just read your labels. If you're eating something that if you would cover the food and just read the label, if you can't tell what you're eating, you probably shouldn't eat it. Because just say an avocado is an avocado. It doesn't have this label of all these crazy things in it. So I would really eat whole foods, and I would stay away from, added sugars, high fructose sugars. Dairy is not the best for a lot of people, and gluten is not very nice either. So those are kind of my 3 or 4, I guess, that when, even in my house, if someone's not feeling right at my house, I'm always looking back. My first question is, what did you eat lately? And it's, I can almost always pinpoint it back. So eat clean, get some sleep, and drink water, stay hydrated.
I think, and I'm always cautious when I talk to people about this stuff, because everybody's at a different point in their journey. For me personally, probably about the end of residency training, my wife and I, she's here today, but we went on a vacation together. And I'd always kind of eaten healthy and tried to, for the most part, exercise throughout most of my life and played sports and stuff. And then, in medical school, sleep goes out the window, nutrition's out the window, exercise is out the window, which is ironic because it's supposed to be building, someone to support the pillars of health, and all the health goes out the window. And so at the end of training, we go on this vacation, and I think it had probably been a few years since I had either taken off my shirt or wore something that wasn't scrubs. So we get on the beach, and she's like, have you weighed yourself recently? And I'm like, I probably weigh like, 170, something like that. And she's like, yeah, and so, weigh myself, and, I'm almost 190 pounds, which for my height is big, and it wasn't muscle. So like people can say it was muscle. And, you start seeing, talking to family members because you're learning all this stuff, and, mom's got diabetes and grandma's got diabetes and hypertension and high blood pressure. And so you kind of have this freak out moment where you're like, same genes, same, probably worst condition of my body as far as, because they were all working and being very active and physical and at least sleeping. And so you have this wake up moment where I just dove head first into health and nutrition, wellness, longevity. And so, I've gone through all the research on sleep and saunas and thermal neutrality and what it does to the mitochondria and diets. And, I've had a deep dive for years, and I say all that to say, never feel bad if someone says, oh, you're not getting enough sunlight exposure, or you need to do sauna. So everybody's in a different realm of that journey. And so there's the way to do it perfect. And then like Jackie was saying, there's the way you start. At starting, I completely agree with what they said. Sleep, and even if for diet, you don't follow any kind of, you don't say, I'm going to do paleo or Mediterranean or any of those diets, just cut out sugar and processed foods so you can eat, and you can get to the point where you're saying, is it pasture raised, organic, non-GMO? Like, take it in tiers and give yourself some grace. Just kind of go through each category and say, like, I'm at my best for sleep, I'm a 4. And for nutrition, I'm at a 2.5, but I'm working there. For exercise and movement, I'm at this. So, when you get in your journey, just take one thing at a time. But if I could pick the 3, best things to do, sleep is obviously the most important, because you literally die if you don't sleep enough, and it can cause a lot of conditions. Cutting out processed foods and sugars, and just eating whole foods. And then you can start with all the nuanced stuff about, where's the cabbage from? Is it nutrient-rich soil and stuff like that? Because you still want to live in the world and have families and friends and go to dinner and not be, not to say crazy about it, but not to be too extreme to where you can still live life. And then start with movement. It doesn't have to be intense exercise. It could be walking, 20 minutes a day. If you could get 150 to 180 minutes of just walking, and then you can build it up from there, then get into strength training and just, start with the big 3, sleep, nutrition, and movement. And then you can start getting into all the other things, because you're going to feel so good. Because my wife and I joke about this all the time, like our kids, they're so healthy and they're so fit, not to brag on them because they're a hot mess too at times. But when they do sports and stuff, they're in great shape. People comment like, they don't have ear infections, they don't have this. And it's not genetic, because we had all this growing up as a kid. We had every ear infection and tubes and all the stuff. A lot of it is just, we focus on their sleep, their nutrition. They got to move, like they got to stay active. And so, if you can kind of almost experiment on them and see that little closed loop. But if we all did that as adults, it'll trickle to our spouse, to our kids, to our family members. And then they get pumped up, and then they say, hey, did you hear about saunas or ice baths? And then then you can expand from there. But I think if you were going to start with those basics.
I do agree that everybody's kind of on a spectrum. And so wherever you are, just thinking about kind of piggybacking, just thinking about leveling up just like one level. And then you can get comfortable there. And that may take a long time, or it may be just a short thing where you've been thinking, oh, I really need to, cut out sugar for a long time, especially after the holidays. You need to cut out all the sugar. And then once you may avoid it for a long time, but once you work on it and you do it, you realize, okay, well, this isn't nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be. And once you get comfortable there, then you level up again and you just continue. Like the levels never stop. You just keep leveling up, but it doesn't have to be all at one time. You just do it, start where you are and go up just one notch.
I know my personal journey when I was struggling really badly, to even figure out a way just to make a dent. I had terrible fatigue, and my first step, which was really hard for me, as a nurse, I drink coffee all day long. It's coffee and water, and that's our two food groups, basically. So I had that 3 p.m. crash every day like clockwork. I didn't have to wear a watch. I knew the second that I was starting to fade, I knew it was 3 o'clock. And I would get a cup of coffee and I would drink coffee until 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And I would go to bed at 8 o'clock without any problems. But I would wake up constantly. I never had a good sleep. So my first thing I said was, I'm going to cut out that 5 o'clock, that 3 to 5 cup of coffee. It was the smallest change. And look, it was terrible the first 2 weeks or so. But once I got over that 2 weeks, it was golden. And I was like, well, this isn't so bad. It was just a little cup of coffee. And then you just make these small little goals. And it may take you two weeks to reach. It may take you a month, 3 months. But it's these little tiny steps that they really do make a big difference. Especially, with your digestion and with your body. So start small.
I had a whole section planned. I was going to rapid fire question them, but we're getting kind of close. So I'm going to just ask audience questions. So does anyone have a question for any or all?
So you talked about, I actually have a ton of questions, but I'm just going to ask one, see if everybody else can. You had mentioned you talked about the fermented foods. So when you say that we have so many different strains of bacteria, different species of bacteria in our gut, so are the different fermented foods, do they have like kimchi or kefir or yogurt, whatever, do they have different bacteria that are in there, that are in each one? So is it, because if from what I've read and what you're saying, we're finding that the different bacteria have different roles, and so they help us out, they provide different benefits. I've even heard where people who are chronically obese their whole lives lack certain bacteria that help with weight loss and different things like that. But do the fermented foods, is there kimchi that has 2 strains versus kimchi that might have 18 strains, or different? Is it pretty?
So the fermented foods, some bacteria are aerobic and some bacteria are anaerobic. So meaning whether they can survive in oxygen. And so fermented foods obviously are going to be the ones that can use oxygen. So it's kind of limited to the variety of bacteria that can be used to ferment foods. But sometimes whenever you look on a fermented food, it will tell you what bacteria is there. And sometimes, usually it's going to be more than 1 or 2. I don't know that there's a number necessarily. It all depends on what the fermentation started with. So it can vary, and the bacteria is going to thrive in some areas. So some bacteria will thrive more whenever they have certain types of proteins or certain types of fibers, like carbohydrate-based fibers. They will thrive in like a sauerkraut versus a type of bacteria that would thrive in a kefir. So I don't know if that exactly answers your question. There's fermented foods has a variety of bacteria, but it's really just a smidgen of the variety that we have in our digestive system.
So it has been shown that different bacteria play different roles. And I always just say it's good to kind of rotate everything. That way you're getting, even when it comes to probiotics, because different probiotics have different strains, different proportions of strains. I find it's always good to, especially if you're just taking a maintenance kind of daily probiotic and you're not specifically treating some sort of dysbiosis that you're just trying to maintain, I would rotate your probiotics. I would take one for a couple months and then take another brand or, concoction of probiotics and just kind of get on this rotation. That way you're getting different strands.
Well, I have heard that you can have an overgrowth of good bacteria too, and then that can cause other symptoms. So that's smart to rotate them. So
I wish we had time to talk about Akkermansia because Dr. Bro and I had a really interesting. We might have to have an Akkermansia panel, but that's the one that it really helps. Well, I don't know if that's the one you're talking about, but it's shown to GLP-1 production. It's really critical.
It's the one most closely tied to weight loss and blood sugar balance.
Yeah, it's cool. Anybody else? Ruby?
So I know that the number one thing that you guys all recommended was sleep. So for example, what if you work graveyard shift and you go to sleep when everyone else is working or the daytime? Does that affect your the way that your food is processed or your energy? Because I think it does, but what if that's the only time you can sleep? And let's say you do get 7 hours or 8 hours, does that still affect? Because I'm pretty sure you need the sun too, right? For vitamin D. But how is? I just was questioning that because I know sleep was said multiple times. So does a graveyard shift that someone works during the night, in the ER nurse or something, does that affect the health too, or at least if they get 7 hours?
She's asking about people working the graveyard shift and if that affects their health.
And is it so? The tough part is, your body can acclimate to a lot of things if it's consistent. And I think the difficult thing, especially with nurses, you probably do 3 or 4 shifts and then you're back to normal life, in quotes, where you get this. So that switch, because your body gets very well tuned to, it gets the first light, the hormones and the things that turn on to wake you up come on. And then ideally you should be in darkness in the evening times. That's where she was talking about blue light and all that stuff and the screens. And then your body, secretes melatonin and the other things, and digestion starts to slow down. So I think, the best you can do, because, I sympathize with you, because that's the kind of stuff I was talking about in training, where it was up for 40 hours and then sleep for 6 hours and then up, and it was just a hot mess. But, I think if you could try to find a way to mimic those things as much as possible, even having, and it's I don't love melatonin supplements and stuff like that, but you almost have to try to find a way to get it to where you can find some kind of normalcy. Because the other thing with the digestive tract, a lot of the housekeeping that kind of just cleans and sweeps out the GI tract happens because you sleep at night, and that's the only time, most people in the US don't eat, myself included, not judging, but is at night when you're sleeping. So it is difficult because you might eat a ton of food right before you have to go to sleep for your shift, which is what I always did. So for you, is it 5 days and then you have a traditional weekend, or is it shifts?
Well, first of all, I'm a mom. And
Yeah, that makes things more complicated.
sleep is yay, it's silent. I can think, and I have to do back end work or send emails or things like that. But I have some friends that they go to sleep at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and it's because they're also getting work done. But I'm pretty sure that would affect the body, correct?
Completely.
That's what I was thinking too. But I'm they still get 7 hours of sleep, and they don't wake up till like 12 o'clock sometimes they're resting. I'm pretty sure that has something to do with the way that they're processing everything, you know, and then like sugars as well too, little by little. I feel like the connection of when you sleep affects how the body's reacting to whatever you're feeding it.
Oh, it does, and Daphne will probably echo the same thing. But your cortisol production and like you make the worst food choices when you've had like a night where you sleep 4 or 5 hours or you're under intense amount of stress. But that's when you'll crave high sugar, you know, high fat foods. And to be honest, you're just tired and you don't care, and so you're just like you just eat it, you know. So I think if you could do your best, I mean, the perfect amount of sleep would probably be between 7 and 9 hours. But I mean, we live in the world like we were talking about. There's scales, like, you know, you definitely don't want to get less than 6.5 hours if at all possible. Like if you did it, you know, one time you slept 6 hours, but you really just try to, like she said, you just try to get back on track and just do your best, because it is difficult when you can't get into a set routine. And also just knowing like those are the times where you make sure you eat while you're at your shift, so you don't eat when you get home right before you're going to sleep. Say you get home at 6 in the morning, you don't want to eat a big old thing of food and then go try to get your 6-7 hours of sleep, because it won't be a really good restful sleep, and the digestive tract doesn't get to do its normal process when it's empty. So just if you could make small adjustments, it's not ideal, but it's still the best of the situation.
I'm going to add to that the times, just like he said, whenever you're tired, whether you like slept or you just didn't have good quality sleep, when you're tired, the two things that you're going to gravitate towards are things that are high in sugar and things that have caffeine, because both of them are going to give you a little bit of a boost. Although it's very short-lived, it's going to give you a little bit of a boost, and then you'll start coming down, and then you're looking for something else that has sugar or caffeine in it. So that's whether you work the graveyard shift or you just burning the candle at both ends. That's what's going to happen whenever you feel fatigue.
We got time for just a couple more questions.
Y'all opinions on fasting? I know there's a lot of different types, you know, intermittent or a 3-day fast, or some people do it longer or whatever, but just to clear out the gut, so to speak, or I guess reset your opinions on that.
And I'm very cautious to look at Daphne because she's a dietitian. But you know, from the data I've gotten, and I read a lot of Peter Attia and kind of people in that wheelhouse. And so, you know, with intermittent fasting and for diets in general, everybody is different. I strongly believe for, you know, medications to diets to it's very person specific. Like some people do terrible with intermittent fasting, but you know, they've had a lot of studies show that it's not necessarily the intermittent fasting that actually causes people to lose weight and have the metabolic improvements. It's just they tend to eat less calories because they have a restricted window. And so even though, so intermittent fasting is considered time restricted feeding as opposed to calorie restricted feeding, which is normal diets. But just by restricting the time window when you are able to eat, a lot of times, unless people try really hard and eat really high calorie foods, they can't consume the same amount of food in that small time window. And so they kind of get calorie restricted feeding as well. So, which is why they'll lose weight. But I will say for some people, if that setup helps you to accomplish your diet goals, like for example, you just have abnormal hours and that's the way you can do it. I think as long as you're conscious about what you're eating during the intermittent fasting, and the biggest thing people have issues with intermittent fasting, in my opinion, is the protein intake. I feel like it's hard to get, you know, like for you, for example, it might be, you know, 150 grams of protein, just for example, or more. And to get that in a 4 to 6 hour window or whatever your window is when you can actually eat, it gets very difficult. And then some people get too hungry and then they make poor food choices. So I don't think it's good or bad necessarily. I think it's person dependent, and if you do it the right way, but you could probably get the same effect for most people by just doing, you know, clean eating with calorie restriction. And I'll let Daphne tear me apart.
No, I think that's correct. I usually think about fasting as about in a 12-hour window. So everybody, I think, should be allowing for about 12 hours of fasting on a daily basis. And that allows for what Dr. Bro was talking, the migrating motor complex, to kind of clean up what's happening in the digestive system, break things down that are kind of lingering. Beyond 12 hours, it can be pushed further. Generally speaking, the research that I've seen is that men tend to do much better with time-restricted eating or intermittent fasting than women do because of hormones that are involved. So it's very dependent on the person. I have worked with women that the mental chatter of food becomes so overwhelming that it's easier for them to just not eat and or not eat at periods of time. So we'll set up a little bit of a fasting situation for them where we'll say, okay, we're going to cut off eating at 6 p.m. and you can eat again at 9 o'clock the next day. And so whenever they have that smaller range of eating, that smaller time frame, they can, at 6 p.m., the mental chatter that happens with food whenever you're watching TV, like, oh, there are those chips in the pantry, like that kind of stuff, whenever they have decided that they're fasting, then that kind of just goes away. And so in some cases, I don't ever recommend extended fasting, like 24-hour fasting or even, anything beyond that. I don't think that's a good idea. But on a regular basis, depending on the time frame, shorter time frames of eating on a regular basis do prevent you from being able to get not just protein, but all of the other nutrients that you need to be able to get your body functioning the way that it's supposed to. So generally, I would say if you're going to do intermittent fasting for longer periods of time, so if somebody wants to do like 16 hours of fasting or 18 hours of fasting, I would say not doing it every single day, because it gives you a little bit more time to, on the days that you're not fasting, to get the nutrients that you need so that you can support the times that you are fasting.
And just to go off of both of these guys, I've found that the clients that I've worked with who have been successful with intermittent fasting have been very determined and compliant. So you just have to recognize if you're a type of person who can follow rules and direction. And the other flip side of that is the intake of the quality food and the amount that you need to sustain your body. If you can get that, I know I'm going to sound like a broken record, if you can get it in that time frame, then I think it's great. But that is the struggle that I've seen with my clients with intermittent fasting, is not being compliant to the times, and then they make poor decisions when it comes to food intake or not getting enough nutrients.
Last question.
And then you can have a whole host of symptoms when you have a gut imbalance with an overgrowth of bad bacteria. Is there a way to fix that? And can you do too much, like eat too much fermented foods, too much yogurt, and can you go the other way and have symptoms from having too much good bacteria, or is that thing?
The question was, can you have an imbalance if you have too much good bacteria? Right? Did I get that? I'm repeating it for the camera. Sorry.
Yeah, so that's a great question, because people can get bacterial overgrowths, and this is the part where a lot of the stuff we're saying with fiber and fermented foods and bacterial populations, it's very person specific, especially like, say for example, someone had a gastric bypass, or they have altered anatomy because they had a surgery and they don't have a portion of the colon or a portion of the small bowel, or even one of the valves is abnormal. Then it changes the whole way that the system's supposed to work. So you can get overgrowths of bacteria, and especially depending on what symptoms you're talking about, it's tough, because they've even had huge studies. Dr. Justin Sonnenberg's done some great stuff with looking at fiber versus fermented foods, and for some people they do great with fiber. Some people get lots of gas and bloating, and a lot of that might be the ramp up period where they might have to take it slower if they weren't eating enough fiber. But same thing for fermented foods. You really have to take it slow with these things. Some diets, in hunter-gatherer places are having 100 grams or 200 grams of fiber. And here, Daphne will probably attest to this, it's like 5 grams or 10 grams maybe.
The average is about 10 to 12 grams of fiber is what Americans consume in a day.
Yeah, and so when you're getting that ramp up, you're going to get a lot of production from even the good, normal, healthy bacteria. There's going to be, it's like all of a sudden they've been starving, and then now their populations just extremely replicate. And it's almost like your body needs some time to adjust to that. So it's like anytime I'm telling someone to increase fiber or fermented foods, you kind of want to have a ramp up period and not do too many things at one time. Like maybe do the fiber first, kind of get to your goal, and then start with the fermented foods, and then try to get to a goal, but very slowly. Everybody's got a different ramp up. And then on the bacterial overgrowth portion of it, there's been a lot linked with especially irritable bowel syndrome, where the bowel is structurally normal, but people have it's almost like abnormal normal reflexes. Like the normal reflex you get when you eat to go to the bathroom, it's just taken to the next level. And sometimes these overpopulation of even good bacteria that are actually there can cause some of these issues. That's where, like they were talking about probiotics, where you're maybe trying to push in a strain that might be more favorable to those conditions to reduce some of those symptoms. But it's very person specific, because someone might take probiotics and get worse, or they get bloating, or some people even say they get dizziness or fatigue. So it is a lot of nuanced, and there's almost 1,000 different strains of bacteria in the GI tract. And like Daphne was saying, there's some that's even, they're so averse to oxygen that it's hard to even, get them out to study them. It's almost impossible unless you build a chamber where you take all the oxygen out. So, a lot of the nuances of what's a good versus a bad bacteria are very complicated. So it's almost just take the good data you have on fiber and fermented foods, go slow, and then if you suspect you might have a bacterial overgrowth, that's whenever you can, come see one of us and talk about the different ways you can maybe adjust your diet to see if that's the issue.
Another thing too is some bacteria are more susceptible to overgrowth depending on the pH of their environment. So if you've been taking acid blockers for a bajillion years, then your pH isn't quite where the bacteria want it to be. And so some bacteria that really thrive in a low pH are going to be higher. And some are going to be non-existent. And so that's where it becomes really personalized and tailored, where testing would be great, stool test or something like that, so you can see exactly which bacteria are high or low, and kind of pinpoint exactly which route to go from there.
Obviously,
I was just going to the analogy that I like to use, what Dr. Bro was talking about, gradually introducing things. I think about like kids in a playground. So if we go to an elementary school and we have all these kids on a playground, they kind of know their friends, they hang out with their friends. Some of them might be a little bit more bullyish than others, but you have administrators that are there and they're like making sure that everything is the way it's supposed to be. And so some of that would be like your certain types of bacteria are what I would consider the administrators that are kind of keeping track of everybody, making sure everything is the way it's supposed to happen. And then if we were on that playground going to bring in a busload of kids, then those kids go into this playground and everybody has to kind of figure it all out again. They have to figure out who their friends are. They have to see who matches, who doesn't. And so that's very different than if you have a playground and you introduce 2 or 3 kids, then it's a lot easier for the balance to remain the same. So if you're introducing a lot of fermented foods or you're introducing a lot of fiber at any given time, that's going to affect the way that the bacteria grow. And so everything has to kind of figure itself out again. So low and slow is really the way that you want to take it with both fermented foods and fiber.
there's obviously a ton of stuff that we could talk about, and we could be here for 5 hours, and there's just no way to do that. And unfortunately, we're out of time for tonight. I just want to thank all of you so much for being here with us. This journey, this health revolution started, Daphne and I, about 6 months ago or a year. We're having coffee and commiserating how there really isn't a community that comes together that's really health minded, and we're like, let's just start our own community. So we're really excited for you guys to be here with us and on this journey. A couple of things before you go. Daphne and I just started a podcast. So go give it a listen. It's should be good. We're interviewing local providers and people with cool health stories, and it's going to grow. Rebecca's going to be on there. Dr. Bro's going to be on there. So yeah.
You want to talk about the March event?
Oh yeah. So we're going to have a March event. The date is TBD. We're having some scheduling questions, but we're going to have an awesome panel. I think Jade's here. I saw her husband. Hi. So Dr. Brennan Kelly is a chiropractor. Dr. Mary Beth Moss, who was at our original panel, she's a physical therapist, and Jade is a health coach and mobility specialist. So we're going to deep dive into movement, your body, pain management. It's going to be good stuff. And I've invited a bunch of other chiropractors to come, and anyone in the fitness and body realm, because honestly, I just know too many of them and I couldn't have 20 people on a panel. So it'll be kind of a symposium, I guess. So thank you all for coming so much.